Good day to everybody, and I'm really very honored to moderate this section of the Global Town Hall. We have with us the presence of four very well-known figures in the international arena. We have Her Excellency Sri Mulyani, the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Pascal, Lamy, President of Paris Peace Forum and former Director General of the World Trade Organization, Professor Andrés Velasco, the Dean of the London School of Economics and Political Science, School of Public Policy, and he was Minister of Finance of Chile from 2006 to 2010. We have also His Excellency Xu Guangyao. He was Vice Finance Minister of the People's Republic of China from 2010 to 2018. Listen, I would like to start by saying that some economists believe that we have moved from the era of uncertainty to the era of anxiety. In fact, some of our colleagues say that we are now in the era of bewilderment. The first 2 decades of this 21st century have been marked by major political, geopolitical, and economic disruptions. The Great Recession had more profound effects than could have been expected, and the slow economic recovery is no stranger to resurgence of populism, economic nationalism. We have witnesses a big increase in the number of protectionist measures around the world, and this has been aggravated by trade wars between some economies. International capital flows have been substantially reduced. Just to give an example, foreign direct investment in 2020 was a third of 20 years before. The COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis have taken us into uncharted territory. The economy of virtually every country in the world fell in 2020 with an uneven recovery this year, and particularly with very different effects on per capita incomes. In most countries, the inequality in the distribution of income and wealth has no doubt increased. Also, after 30 years of fast reduction in the number of poor people around the world, it is very likely that the pandemic may have had very big negative effects. The pandemic has also been a major disruptor in global value chains and has now given place to inflationary pressures in several countries. But the disruptions to value chains were well on the way since before the outbreak of the pandemic. Don't surprise then that the people interested in the well-being of the world economy, as is this time hall, want to devise measures to get the economy engine working again and find a tune. The 50th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum was devoted to the Great Reset, the name of this panel. And it was just following the starting of the COVID pandemic, and the idea was to create the conditions for a stakeholder economy, covering several aspects, from social security, equality, and equity, to healthcare and sustainability, among many other things. Let me say that since the term Great Reset was coined, many things have happened in the world economy, from a V-shaped recovery of world GDP and trade to the dislocation of the global value chains. let me ask Her Excellency Sri Mulyani, how will you define the Great Reset today? Do you think we're losing or gaining momentum to achieve it? You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Fernando. Very good afternoon to all of you in the ASEAN region, or good evening or good morning to the other part of the world. First, when we are talking about Great Reset, especially using the momentum of pandemic, we know very well that this pandemic entering the second year hit hard, especially for the people, informal sector at the grassroots level. So for many countries in the world, they really have to really addressing the issue not only on the health challenge, but also how to protect the society, especially the most vulnerable one. Now, when designing the policy responding to this very threatening challenge, we really have bear in mind, of course, focusing on the pandemic itself. For example, like providing testing, treatment, tracing, as well as vaccination, but also protecting the most vulnerable. And that's really costs country a lot. For country who has a fiscal space, they are using all their space in order to protect their people, their society, as well as the economy. And that's why many countries in the world, they are running more larger deficit and increasing public debt. Now, when we talk about Great Reset, in which we are thinking that this huge or significant shock to the world can also provide us an opportunity to reset, that is reshaping first the world in order to design the recovery of the activity of the people economy, by bear in mind that the world is also suffering from the climate change threat, which we are all aware from the evidence, from the scientific result or study, that this world, if we do nothing, or even if we are delivering what we are all has already committed, national determined commitment, unconditional, the world is still heading to the increasing 3.2 degree centigrade. And that means it will create a devastating impact for many countries, especially poor countries. So while we are now very, very focused on the pandemic and its very dire consequences, do we still have also resources as well as the ability to think about climate change, which is also another big threat for all people in the world? And just like pandemic, climate change cannot be addressed by any country alone. So collaboration, cooperation is very, very critical. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, Fernando, on your opening, the world is now facing with a very dire and very complex situation in which collaboration and cooperation is becoming a rare or a luxury word. It's sometimes very difficult for us. Unlike the situation in 2008, 2009, when the world almost collapsed with the global financial crisis, then the G20 leaders get together. They are facing this threat to all countries, and they come together with one coordinated, not only commitment, but also policy action that save the world. But that kind of situation now with this pandemic is not happening. What is happening is each country try to save their own people. And this is also can be seen from the vaccination, and unfortunately then created uneven recovery. So now the question, when you mentioned about what is happening with Great Reset, everybody can make a wish that we wish that this is going to happen, in which all leaders with their leadership, with their commitment, they are going to deliver. But this definitely also require a framework of cooperation. Indonesia as a country will use our role as well as our own responsibility in many fora, especially global fora, to play a constructive role. For example, in the G20, we also voicing the concern and the view of many developing and emerging countries to get the vaccine and the vaccination more for especially developing emerging country. On the climate change, we also saying that we commit using our resources. We even during this very difficult pandemic situation, we use this opportunity to reform ourselves. We take some very difficult policy action because we know that this is not just surviving and recover, but we really want to recover better. We want to recover stronger. And
I,
that's
will- I,
why exactly this is what we're
I
trying to
will
do.
be asking. I will be asking a
Okay,
question about that later on. Now,
okay.
let me turn to Pascal and ask him what is the starting point of this great reset? Is world economy in a period of deglobalization, or is it just taking a pause? Or is it moving to a new, different kind of globalization with the services as the center of gravitation? What's your take, Pascal, on this?
Well, thank you, Fernando, and hi, Sri, Andrés, and Minister Chu. I'll answer your question very rapidly. If you look at the dynamics at play on this planet, most of them in recent times have been about fragmentation, about division, and about an increase in disparities. And overall, the COVID crisis has amplified, accelerated these disparities. We have a huge disparity with this vaccine apartheid, which we have on this planet now. This will have increased another disparity, which was reducing for the last decades, but which is now augmenting, which is the North-South divide. We have a disparity in the carbon transition, which is now becoming the number one issue in many economies, but with time horizons for zero carbon very different, with time horizon when carbon peak happens very different, with incredibly different tools, permits, taxation, regulation, subsidies, and we also have a fragmentation in the digital world, which is becoming more and more important, with an obvious bifurcation between US and China, and probably later a trifurcation between US, China, and Europe, who digital-wise will not want to be aligned on either of these two giants. Now, does this mean, and I'm coming to your question, Fernando, does this mean that we are in for a deglobalization? I don't think that at all. There are signs of less trade openness in some areas. There are a few conversations, although in my view, more walk than talk in reshoring. There is a sort of geopolitical, geoeconomic, geostrategic decoupling between US and China, because both US and China, unfortunately, are moving in this direction because they both feel too vulnerable to each other. So we have signs of a different pattern, although this, in my view, is not a change of paradigm. So globalization is changing its pattern, it's not changing its paradigm. And the reason why it's not changing its paradigm is that it's basically motored, engined by technological progress, science, which does not know about borders, which is still moving and increasing interdependence, including in a world of big data, but this needs different patterns of governance, different patterns of cooperation, and this is where I think we need to focus in order to try and get a number of operational conclusions on how can we avoid this fragmentation to turn into an anti-globalization which would be inevitably bad for the poorer countries of this planet. And I think on this, the theme of the Paris Peace Forum, which I chaired, as you said, Fernando, and which was last week, this year, was Mind the Gaps. I think we have to try and close these gaps. Part of that has to do with existing institutions, treaties, diplomats, traditional Westphalian arrangements, and there is a lot to be done to reshape part of this institutional apparatus, which is now a bit obsolete if you look at that seen from the eyes of newcomers on the world scene. But you also have to try, and this is what we are trying to do with the Paris Peace Forum, we also have to try to engage in international cooperation other than sovereigns. Sovereigns have a hard time agreeing on many things today. Diplomats are needed, but to be frank, they are not providing the sort of results which we should expect from international cooperation. So we need others to step in. We need businesses, we need NGOs, big academic institutions, we need cities. This, I think, is the way to go to try and avoid these growing gaps to turn into a less peaceful world. Over to you, Fernando.
Thank you very much. Let me now turn to Andrés and just follow up with what you said. No, for 3 decades, the disparity between North and South had been reduced, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, well, there has been a big incidence in this disparities. But I also the inequalities within countries have been increasing during the past years, and I'm afraid that the number of poor people during this pandemic and even now in recovery has grown substantially, particularly in developing countries. So, Andrés, what should the Great Reset do to reduce inequality and poverty? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Fernando. And let me begin by saying what an honor it is to be joining this panel with such distinguished world leaders and friends. The title of this block of questions is The Great Reset, and that presumes that after the crisis, we will do things differently. But if we look at previous crises, including the world financial crisis of 10 years ago and many others, during the crisis or in its immediate aftermath, there's a great deal of talk about doing things differently, but often, way too often, we end up doing the same all over again. So my first point is that yes, there is much need for a reset, but it is not guaranteed that the reset will happen. And as both Mulyani and Pascal emphasized, the obstacles are many, including some that are directly in the policy and political arena. Many of these issues are global issues. Many of them require decisions at the global and at the national level. And I think that calls for the kind of politics that is very, very different from what we have seen in recent years. On the contrary, the world has been moving toward a kind of politics in which polarization, sound bites with little content, and populism seem to be taking the front row. And I think that is a very dangerous development indeed. On inequality, you're absolutely right, Fernando, that we have to distinguish between 2 very different periods when it comes to emerging and developing countries. It has become a cliche to say that over the last 3 decades, the world became more unequal, but of course that's not true. Advanced economies, particularly the English-speaking advanced economies, became more unequal within country. but inequality across countries diminished, largely as a result of the rise of the emerging markets like China, like Indonesia, India, and others. It is also true that partially as a result of a policy switch, partially as a result of the boom in commodity prices a decade or so ago, within country inequality fell quite substantially in many developing and emerging nations, including Fernando, Latin America, where you and I come from. One of the terrible outcomes of this pandemic is that it has set back many emerging and developing countries decades in their efforts to reduce poverty and in their efforts to alleviate inequality. And I think we have to be aware that there are many failures of international governance that made this very sad outcome possible. If we think about international financing and the kinds of fiscal policies that international financing makes possible, the truth is that rich countries were able to mount fiscal packages of over 15% of GDP, middle-income countries packages of about 7.5% of GDP, and low-income countries half of that, less than 5% and often around 3% of GDP. And to a very large extent, this was the result of an inability of current world arrangements to provide the necessary financing. The IMF told the world that nearly 2 trillion would be needed. The IMF and other organizations in the end provided only a small fraction of that. But before I get too pessimistic, let me just mention 3 things that we should be thinking about, Fernando, and perhaps we can revisit them in future rounds of questions. There are opportunities for developing countries and for the sort of reset when it comes to fighting poverty and inequality. A very important one is green investment that creates jobs. It is good for the environment, but it is also good for poverty and inequality. Secondly, the future of work is changing, clearly. Some of that is threatening. Some of that may bring good news. And last but not least, what are we doing right now? We're interacting across space and time via Zoom. That means that for some developing countries, the opportunity of exporting professional services, exporting other kinds of services via technology also offers an opportunity. Maybe those are 3 things that, if tackled and used correctly, could get us out of the current funk, because the current funk is indeed a big, big source of worry. Let me stop there. And again, thanks very much.
No, thank you, Andrés. Let me turn now to Zhu and ask him. I mean, the Great Reset is all about cooperation, harnessing the digital revolution, economic recovery, sustainability, etc. So what is the perspective of a developing country, the perspective of the Global South on the Great Reset agenda? Is it a priority? How do you see it from China? Your Excellency.
Thank you, Fernando. I think you are absolutely right. You correctly mentioned the point 1, cooperation, point 2, digital economy development. I think those 2 points is a very close connect with the Great Reset. Without that, I think it's very challengeable. I appreciate very much Minister Siriani mentioned 2008 international financial crisis. Global cooperation, particularly G20, played fundamental role to promote global cooperation to deal with international financial challenge. Unfortunately, today we miss the opportunity. COVID-19 pandemic caused the global systematic crisis. It's not only global public health crisis, it's economic crisis, also the governance crisis. To deal with the challenge of systematic crisis, really need global cooperation. We hope we can learn the lessons from the last 12 months. Global not make the real solidarity to deal with the crisis. That's a disaster for whole human being. It's time we back to the right channel. That's the multilateralism. That's the spirit of global cooperation, particularly the experience we should learn and that from 2008 financial crisis. And I do believe now the disaster, the negative impact is more than 2008. So we must have real cooperation and to use the whole countries together to promote the process of Great Reset. That's in line with any country's interest. And the second point, digital economy development. We see during this last 12 months in the negative impact by pandemic, the digital economy developed very rapidly because people impossible to have public activities. The long-term education, long distance working and working at home. Also, the medical treatment use a long distance way. Really promote digital economy development. But there's new challenges. Technology developed very fast. That's good for human being to deal with the challenge of pandemic. On the other hand, the real challenge is international regulation. How to give all the governors for digital economic development is very important. So
can I ask you this at the further station because it's very, very important what you're saying. I'm coming now to Sri and Pascal with a very important question that has been mentioned in previous panels, but I think it's very important to our own work here. Of course, COP26 just wrapped up last week, and there's been a lot of talking about a carbon tax. I want to ask you two things. First, why do you think it's important to have a carbon tax? And secondly, what is your view of a border carbon tax?
Well, thank you, Fernando. First, the climate change is a complex challenge. We recognize that all countries need to contribute, and that's why the Paris Agreement, in which country committed to contribute on a reduction of the CO2, is very critical. But we also know that this contribution cannot be done without resources. And that's why on this commitment, in order for us to even avoid the increasing temperature closer to now, we even commit to avoid 1.5, which we are now in a 1.1 degree centigrade. That's definitely require a very, very substantial, not only policy and regulation, but also resources and technology. Now, if we talk about the policy regulation, one very important mechanism is market. If the world saying that we are threatened by the climate change because of the CO2 emission, while at the same time the world didn't or don't recognize this bad goods, that is the bad that is the pollution. There is no consequences, there is no price, then you cannot saying that you can prevent this climate change, because everybody can freely, polluting the world, keep emitting the CO2 without any consequences. So the first thing to do is how we can introduce market mechanism. Of course, ideally it should be global, because if it is not, then you are going to have an arbitrage. But it will not be fair, because the world in terms of who polluting first and how much, it's not the same for each country. So the most complicated on this climate change commitment is how we are going to introduce market mechanism in which you are going to be explicitly put price on the CO2, and at the same time also recognizing that the contribution and who's causing this climate change first should also pay their price. Now, this is going to be, each country can wait. Of course, we all know that in the Paris Agreement, the advanced country committed to have 100 billion per year for emerging and developing country, which they didn't deliver until now. It seems like on a climate, on a Glasgow, they say that they are going to deliver in 2025. But for all country, the choice is actually you just wait until all necessary condition is going to be fulfilled, but the necessary condition will not be fulfilled or will be so late to be fulfilled, and then the world will face with the disaster. So for a country like Indonesia, we choose to play our part, as I mentioned earlier, in a constructive way. We know that there are so many commitments, especially by advanced country, has not been delivered, especially on the resources and technology. It doesn't mean that we have to wait until the disaster coming. So Indonesia now introducing carbon market in which carbon tax also play an important instrument. We know exactly that we have to start from somewhere, because establishing carbon market is going to be also complex for any country or for the world. For Indonesia, we will start this by establishing rule regulation. We introduce government regulation, presidential decree, recognizing explicitly the value of carbon. So the value, economic value of carbon. Then we can introduce market mechanism. We establish the institution, regulatory framework, and the regulators. Then we pass a law on a carbon tax, in which we first introduce cap and trade. So for the coal-based electricity, we are going to provide cap. If you are emitting more than this cap, then you have to buy carbon. So we introduce the price first, but the price is still very low. But we know that this is just the starting point.
Very good. Pascal, your take.
Well, let me make sure I'm not with it. Yeah, I'll start where Sri left it, with a 100% agreement with her that we have to try as much as possible to play on market mechanisms so that our economies do go with this formidable transformation which is needed both by production and by consumption. So pricing carbon is the right way to go. There are different instruments to do that. Emission permits, which is the one we use in Europe, taxation, which we also use, regulation, subsidies. So the general direction is absolutely clear, and the solution would be very simple if we all agree that the carbon price has to be 200 euros 10 years from now. This, unfortunately, is not possible, and those who pretend it is possible are selling dreams, pie in the sky. The reality is that each and every country is moving more or less quickly, more or less differently towards this, but with a huge heterogeneity in the way we do that. Hence, an enormous problem of cooperation, which, of course, would be, again, the right theoretical solution. Such a cooperation, and we've seen that at Glasgow, and we will see that next year in Egypt, is out of reach. So we need a sort of second best approach, which is what the European Union is putting on the table with its carbon border adjustment mechanism. we have a 65 euro a ton carbon price for the price of the EU economy, which has, for the part of the EU economy, which has to pay for the moment, which is not all the economy. The rest of the economy need to go there, including, for instance, agriculture, which, as you know, may raise serious political problems. But we in the European Union will keep moving, whereas others have a much lower carbon price, which then leads to the risk of carbon leakages. If I'm a producer in the European Union and I have to pay 65 euros a ton, I will delocalize to a country which has to pay 30 or 10 or 5, which is probably the level of the price of carbon in many economies today, for instance, like China. So the EU CBAM is not a trade measure, although it is applied at the border. It's not something of a levy which you create to make money. I think the European dream is that the CBAM would be useless as quickly as possible when other countries raise their own carbon price. It's a way to signal that we all have to do as quickly as possible. And of course, the first mover always get a part of the blame. But I think personally, I've been against carbon border adjustment mechanism for a large part of my trade life. When the price of carbon was around 5, 10, 15 euros, with 65 now, we cannot do otherwise, while recognizing that this necessitated a lot of international conversation, cooperation. Hence, my proposal, as one of the authors of this CBAM in a piece which the Europe Jacques Delors, which is the Brussels-based Institute Jacques Delors, published last year. I mean, we published the first CBAM template 18 months ago with a proposal that we should have in the World Trade Organization a comparability forum where we would exchange the way we intend to move in this decarbonation direction, and then hoping that this comparability forum will one day become a compatibility forum. Another sort of more complex, more simple name is carbon clubs, which I think is the real way to go. Over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let me now change a bit the way of we're conducting the questions. I'm going to take a question from the public, and there is a question from Philippe. He is from Monaco, and is directed to you. And the question is, what are the prospects of digital economy in terms of achieving growth, closing inequality gaps, especially during the pandemic? And this, I imagine, both in developed, but particularly in developing countries.
Yes, that's a very important issue. That's a digital gap now is a big challenge for developing countries. And not only the gap in technology side, also the standard and how to make the real guidance, make that international standard to promote digital economy development and benefit the developing country is very, very key. China fully understand how important in global cooperation on digital economic development. Particularly, we are willing to join with other countries to work together to make up the international standard or regulation. We understood currently in the world, only EU has general data protection regulation. That's within 27 EU countries. In the other side, the world really need to work together to make that real standard to promote digital economy development. Unfortunately, so far, WTO e-commerce negotiation, no big progress made because there's a different proposal made. For example, US proposal emphasized cross-border data freely and also non-localization requirement. EU particularly emphasized privacy protection and some IPR issue. The developing country, including China, more emphasize the data sovereignty. And now we need work together. So I think that's a very important point is President Xi Jinping made in Roma G20 meeting. China prepared join the digital economy partnership agreement. Now 3 countries, New Zealand, Singapore, and your country, Fernando, Chile.
It's Chile.
Chile,
Andrés' country.
Yes, Chile.
We were thinking about it.
Okay, sorry. That's
Okay.
sorry that Chile. Anyway, that's 3 countries. China already formally announced to join that, and I wish through our hard working to promote the cooperation and benefit to the world to make the international standard for governance of digital economy development, particularly eliminate digital gap between developing the country with developed country. That's so important, connected with the poverty reduction.
I've been told by the organizers that we're running out of time. So let me move to Andrés. And first of all, as Finance Minister of Chile, Andrés, you were very successful in dealing with the 2009 world financial crisis. What would be your advice for a sustainable recovery of the currency situation? Do you see a big danger in the inflationary pressures we are witnessing around the world? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Fernando. I think one always has to keep an eye on inflation. I come from an inflationary region, and we should never take inflation lightly. But I am of the school that thinks that a great deal of the inflation that we're seeing today in the world is more of a transitory nature than of a permanent nature. That is to say, central banks have to act, but they have to act with moderation, understanding that there is a threat there, but that the threat is manageable. Having said that, and you were very kind, Fernando, in alluding to what we did in Chile back 12 years ago. What we tried to do back then, I think, is relevant today. Rich countries, developed countries, forever have been engaging in counter-cyclical fiscal policies. And of course, their ability to do that is much larger than that of emerging markets. And one example was the COVID crisis, in which they really threw, the piano out the window in terms of additional expenditure. Many developing countries wished they could have done more. Some were able to. If you look at Brazil, if you look at Peru, and if you look at Chile, for instance, South Africa, Turkey, and others did in fact engage in counter-cyclical fiscal policies. But what I learned, Fernando, during that crisis is that one has to emphasize anti-crisis, one also has to emphasize counter-cyclical. That means one has to be very aggressive in pumping up expenditure, in providing help to households, in stimulating consumption and investment as the crisis arrives. But it is also very important to be very aggressive on the other side of the cycle. That is to say, once the crisis begins to recede, to take your foot off the accelerator, to contain the growth of expenditure, and what is just as important, to contain the growth of debt. And in that regard, let me say that growth in debt, both private and public, is an issue in a number of emerging market economies, not so much in low-income economies, but there are a number of middle-income economies where the growth of debt begins to be an issue. It was not much of an issue in a world in which interest rates were very, very low. The carrying cost of that debt was close to nil, but it is a fact of life that interest rates are rising, granted from a very low level, but they are rising. And this can create a dangerous cycle in which interest rates come up. Governments do not want to lock in the higher interest rate for a long period of time. They begin to borrow short. The average maturity of that debt is reduced, and then potentially you get a big bunching of amortizations, potential runs on debt, something that, in Latin America, but not only in Latin America, we know very well, and that can bring a great deal of trouble. Two policy implications, and I will stop. One policy.
Sorry.
Yeah, there I am. I think I got muted somehow, but I'm back.
Yeah.
Governments have to be very mindful of debt management going forward, particularly of the maturity of that debt. And secondly, and I will end here, as we think in terms of ambitious goals for this reset, I mentioned this early, but I want to underscore it right now. Green infrastructure investment is the answer to a lot of our problems. The environmental problem, the growth problem, the good jobs, poverty and inequality problem. But increasingly, we have to make sure that that investment is not financed by debt alone, because the debt carrying capacity of a lot of emerging and developing countries is quite limited. And it is here that the world community has to become a lot more creative and a lot more ambitious. Mulyani mentioned how the big commitment by rich countries has been delayed again and again and again when it comes to the climate transition. Hopefully that delay is coming to an end. We do not know yet. But when it comes to investment, and we need massive, massive investment, particularly in the case of low-income countries, non-debt creating flows, partnership with the private sector, de-risking of projects, simply grants in the case of the poorest and lowest income countries, all of that is going to be necessary. And this is one area where we are way behind the curve, and we have to do a great deal more because time is short.
Thank you very much, Andrés. And then let me then ask Sri, what does Indonesia intend to do in the global economic recovery effort? How do you think the G20 members under Indonesia's leadership can heal the world's economy? What can we expect from your leadership in the coming G20 presidency?
Well, I will also pick from what Andrés mentioned earlier, which is, I think this is going to be one of the most challenging time in 2022 after COVID, is the recovery with the unsynchronized direction of policy between some which is already recovered, but also accompanied by high inflation, with those which is still like behind and already exposed with the high debt, with a higher interest rate coming, peppering. Now, at the same time, they are not yet recovered. Then it's going to be a very complex on what we call it policy coordination. So I agree. And in terms of for country to be able to invest in the green, but also at the same time not exposing further to the debt, that means you have to reform your investment climate. This is what the Indonesia do with the Omnibus Law on job creation. We also do in creating a platform for public-private partnership, blended finance, using the what you call philanthropic to do the catalytic and addressing the de-risking, so that we are going to be able to broaden the equity-based financing rather than debt financing. Having said that, on the G20, I think this is exactly the area that is going to be the focus of the discussion. Exit policy, how soon you should exit from the policy which is extraordinary, especially during this COVID, with the extraordinary fiscal policy, extraordinary monetary policy. So how soon? Andrés mentioned that when you see that the crisis recede, then you have to take off your foot from the pedal. That is exactly what needs to be done. It is an art, but also evidence-based at the same time. Because each country have their own situation. This is going to be one of the important discussion in the G20. That is discussion about exit policy, but how you can synchronize, although it is unsynchronized situation. That is going to be one of the most important discussion. And then we are going to discuss also on the sustainable finance and climate change, where we are discussing what Andrés mentioned about the investment on the green. So China and United States is now in the working group on climate change. We also have sustainable finance. I do hope this is going to be elaborated more, not only in the form of principle, but how we are going to have a more example of how you are going to get there. There is a principle, there is an example, so that it can be scaled up. The third one, we'll learn from this pandemic that the world is not prepared from this pandemic. So we are also initiating the health finance minister discussion about how the world can better prepare, because this is not just the domain of the health, it is not just the domain of the finance minister as the consequences, but a joint discussion in which the world can establish a mechanism with the WHO, multilateral agency, and the world, and also sovereign country can support how the world can be better prepared on the pandemic preparedness in the future. We are going to also discuss on the one which is Mr. Zhu mentioned earlier on a digital economy, because this is going to be also the future. And we've already starting, so we talk about including in this case cryptocurrency, but the digital currency, digital taxation, global taxation, this is going to be the area. Most importantly, of course, we want under the Indonesia presidency, the world could achieve what our theme is actually proposing: recover together, recover stronger. That is exactly what we try to provide, this cooperation platform for all the leaders to be able to then contribute in a constructive way. That is more or less what we are going to discuss on this G20, Fernando, including, of course, when you talk about great reset, inequality, we will also in this digital technology and digital economy, financial inclusion is going to be very important. So that is the area which is going to be important. This is need quite a lot of communication, engagement, but also reaching out to all both the G20 country as well as wider stakeholder at the global level.
Thank you very much, Ri. I think that all what you have mentioned is very important for the world economy, and I think it gives you the opportunity of providing the guidance during your presidency during the next year. Now I have a last question. I have a last question that I want to ask to you three. Unfortunately, Pascal had to leave because he had another meeting. So I'm going to ask you the three of you. You have 3 minutes to answer this, and this. That many worry that the US-China tensions will jeopardize global efforts for resetting and building back better. Economic recovery, climate change, there's already been some kind of a preliminary agreement that there's been talks about this, and international cooperation for all the other fields, and many more. I could have a long list. So what is your take on this? I will start with Xu, because he's one of the interested parties in this, the differences between China and the United States. So please, you have the floor.
So to be honest, the relationship between China and the United States is the most important and also most complicated in current world. Last several years, due to the wrong policy adopted by Trump administration, relationship deteriorated very rapidly. Since January 20 this year, Biden administration in White House, and so far we still have many problems, including tariff issue. But last week, the virtual meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Biden is very constructive, and we do believe that's good start. Although we understood the one meeting couldn't solve all issues, and but that's basic consensus I understood is between President Xi, President Biden, with 3 key points. Number 1, mutual respect. Number 2, peaceful coexist. And number 3, cooperation for win-win result. And both senior staff with brief meeting after the virtual meeting of 2 presidents. I think that's global reaction also positive. And the challenge is still there. We had lessons. We also had experience to deal with the challenge in relation to deal with the US-China relationship. And I think that's my personal experience. That's the 4 point, very, very important. Firstly, both sides recognize each other's development is opportunity rather than threat for their own development. And secondly, the both sides recognize the responsibility as key countries to safeguard the global peace and development and maintain current international order. That's very important too. The third point, the both sides should have real channel, privately exchange view on very sensitive issue, not through microphone diplomacy. That's very bad negative impact for our own interest and also for the world. The last point, my experience, particularly both sides working team should keep 24 hours communication. And they have responsibility to connect each other for information change and timely report, because there's 2 important relations and 2 complicated and covered every area, the economic, political, and even more broadly geopolitical issues. So if we can handle with these 4 basic points, we do believe we can maintain the healthy relationship. Although, because there's 2 countries so large and so complicated and so diversified, we have many different views. We should handle them with safeguard. So we think the relationship between China, US is not only interest for China, for US, also for the world. We understood this responsibility. Thank you.
No, thank you. Zri, your take on this?
I think Mr. Zhu is already explaining quite a lot. The world definitely need the 2 largest power to coexist, respect each other, and establish what you call it the world order. What we learned in the past 30 years is that many of the divergence has been converged in terms of the development goals. It's because the world cooperate. There is quite a mechanism for our country in this case to gain what you call it development progress because of this good cooperation. So I do hope that, because there are still many developing and emerging countries which is still not yet first, of course, affected by this COVID, as well as still continue to do the development. They deserve to have an environment globally which is more cooperation and establish a mutual, what you call it, constructive engagement that then can have respecting, of course, as Mr. Zhu mentioned, respecting each of the unique situation based on a universal value. Then we are going to be able to create a cooperative platform globally. So I do hope that this starting discussion or call by the 2 leaders is going to provide a good support for establishing a cooperative and constructive situation I'm sorry. No. that's my grandchildren is now to try to distract me.
You're too
Okay.
young to have grandchildren. So, Andrés, your take.
Thank you, Fernando. Let me begin by saying that the world should welcome the change we have seen in the United States. Now the United States is being governed by an adult. It has come back to the trade negotiations. It has come back to its sort of put aside the policy of crafting protection by tweet at 3 a.m. And of course, perhaps most important, it has played a leadership role in the climate discussions. So that is all very good news. At the same time, let me join my colleague and friend Sri Mulyani in saying that the world needs the US and China not only to get along, the world needs the US and China to exercise the kind of leadership role which, if I can be so bold as to say it, they have not been exercising recently. Let me provide two examples. One of them, and this points to the developed countries, and of course the United States is a leader among developed countries, the very large delays, not only in committing, but also in actually providing the necessary financing for low-income nations to make the transition away from carbon. That has been long in the making, but the delivery has not quite happened. The deadlines keep shifting. That is the kind of area where we're going to need more leadership from countries like the US, the European Union, and other major advanced economies. We're also going to require leadership from China. And let me give you one example where I think the world could have expected or wanted to expect more from China. It is a pity that at the very last minute, the commitments to reduce the use of carbon in electricity generation was watered down here at Glasgow. There was a text that was in fact a great deal more ambitious than the text that was eventually approved. And I think, the world would have benefited, planet Earth would have benefited if a number of countries, including the People's Republic of China, including India and others, had taken a more forward-looking approach. I was a finance minister. I'm aware that these are tricky issues. I am aware that the politics of carbon emissions is very, very difficult. So I do not expect miracles, but clearly we are at a crisis situation. 1.5 is where we have to go, but it is far from guaranteed. In fact, even after Glasgow, nothing allows us to sleep well at night thinking that we will be able to contain warming at 1.5 degrees. And therefore, everybody, and especially large countries like the US and China, have a great deal more to do here. Again, it is not easy, but we all need it, and we have the right to be hopeful. And again, Fernando, esteemed colleagues on the panel, what a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for this invitation. And congratulations to our Indonesian host for an absolutely wonderful, wonderful town hall meeting at the global level.
I want to join you by congratulating our Indonesian hosts. Sri, thank you very, very much. And this has been a wonderful panel, a wonderful, I don't know if it's a round table or panel, what it is, but what we have had is a great discussion in such a big area. It's, we touched almost all the most important economic problems that we are facing, and that what you have said is that it's not easy. We have been moving little by little, and it's going to take a time to for the recovery. We're going to still have many things to do to take the countries down from, out of the hole we were in during last year and this year. But trade and investment seem to to start doing well already. And what we need is more cooperation, more collaboration among countries, and having Indonesia as the chair of the G20 provides those assurances that they will try their best to do it. And I'm sure they're also in Geneva next week already. The 12th ministerial conference will be a success. So I want to thank you all very much for your wonderful words, with your wonderful reflections. And I want again to thank our hosts and congratulate them for a success. Having I had somewhere the numbers here, 12,000 people connected to this Zoom, with coming from 117 countries. So thank you again, congratulations, and hope to see you all very soon.
Thank you, Fernando. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Andrés,
Thank you.
Mrs.
Bye.
Zhu. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Real pleasure. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ambassador De Mateo. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching the Global Town Hall session on growth, inequality, disruptions, and dislocations in the world economy. What has happened to the Great Reset? Coming up, we will have another stand-up comedy session, which will begin after the break. You don't want to miss this one. See you soon.